All right, good evening. It's time for us to begin our Wednesday Bible study. If you'd like to, go ahead and open up to Genesis chapter 25. Genesis 25, we're going to start there this evening. We're continuing our character study of Jacob. A little bit, we're going to cover a little overlap of Isaac. So he's still in the picture for now, and then we'll get into some very interesting aspects of Jacob's character. So let's go ahead and have a word of prayer, and then we'll get started. Our most blessed and righteous Father, thank you so much for all that you do for us. We pray that we would always focus upon your love and your grace, that we would know that it's where we can truly find happiness and tranquility in this life of turmoil and hate. We pray that you be with us this evening as we study the characters of the Old Testament and look at their lives in relationship with you, and be able to draw some spiritual truths from them and be able to make it a part of who we really are, so that as we live in this world, that people would be able to look at us and see a reflection of you, and hopefully that would cause them to want to know more about our faith, and then ultimately, Father, that we could bring them to you and your truth and make them a child of yours. We ask all this in Christ's name, amen. So as we talk about Jacob is probably one of the most fascinating type of patriarchs, I think, complex-wise, when it comes to Old Testament. Jacob, when we look at his name alone, we know that it means a supplanter, one who deceives. And this is something that's going to come back, and it's going to get him as well. It's something that he's going to not only do, but he's also going to end up feeling the other end of it. I think one of the greatest lessons, if you don't make it through the rest of this Bible study this evening, is that God is hard to understand sometimes on who he chooses to accomplish what he wants. When we look at it, we know that ultimately God is trying to fulfill, well, he's not trying, he is fulfilling a promise going all the way back to Eve, that a descendant of his was going to come through her and was going to defeat Satan. Then we find a covenant with Abraham, a very specific individual that God had chosen because he was faithful, and that he is now going to give a blessing to him. But within that blessing, we find a part of that promise going to Eve. And then through his descendants was a part of that promise. So now God has to use Abraham's descendants. He's stuck with Abraham. He loves him. He's promised it. But now his children. And you know how children are. So now we see that that's going to have to continue through. So when we think about why Jacob, I mean, we know the rest of the story, and you'd say, well, Esau. Well, maybe Esau's attitude and everything about him was the fact that the way he was treated, that God didn't choose him. And sometimes we read Romans where it says, I hated Esau and I loved Jacob. And we think, well, God from the get-go just hated Esau. But it's not true. It's something where we have a hard time wrapping our minds around the idea that God, one, he knows the heart of man. Just like with David, when David was selected and he told Samuel, I know the heart of man. So sometimes it's hard for that. So last week we started wrapping up the end of Isaac, but it's still, like I said, there's another story in between, and we come back into Isaac and Esau. But as we look at this, we see the birth of them starts out with the complexities of pregnancy. And not only just any pregnancy, but going to have twins. And anytime you have twins, it automatically makes it a difficult pregnancy. It's automatically a high risk in today's terms of it. And if you look at this is something I hadn't quite thought about, but I don't know exactly what the mortality rate for babies, newborns, but I know that in the 1600s, newborns dying was pretty likely. I mean, it was fairly common that a newborn child could die. And so if you had twins, even more so. So you jump back 2,000 years and you think about the idea of a woman having twins, a lot of the high-risk things and complications. But now, Rebecca automatically determines there's something else going on here. There's more going on there. She feels that there's like a struggle going on in between them. And so she goes to the Lord, and the Lord tells her, there is two nations in your womb and two peoples. In other words, two races of people. This is where, you know, I've looked at this and used this to explain sometimes when the promise to Abraham said that it was going to come a blessing to all nations. And I think this is a good verse here to show. Here he's talking about nations, but they're races. Two peoples were going to come out of this, and it was going to be a type of people. But anyway, so, but it's going to be the opposite of what she expects. The oldest is not going to be the one that's going to be prominent. He's not going to be the one that's going to be the inheritor. But very boldly, God says that the older will serve the younger. And that's just absolutely abnormal in the culture of that day and age, because it was always the firstborn. He got the larger portion of the inheritance, and he would become the head of the family, or the clan, as you would say. So in the birth, the very first thing we find descriptive, and I'm going to go back and read verse 24 through 28, because we did that last week, so we can kind of move on. But Esau is described as coming out red and hairy. And that's where Edom, red, comes from. And then Jacob's born, and he's described as doing what? Latching onto his brother's foot. This is where he gets supplanter, tripper, traitor, or tripper, trickster, deceiver. So that's his name there. And then we jump right into the description of what type of children these young boys were. We have one who's a man's man, and I felt bad saying that, but after I was doing some reading and studying this week, that's kind of what he was. He was a man of the field. He went out, he hunted. He was out there, and he hunted and developed quite a craft at hunting. Jacob, on the other hand, he's a homebody. He likes it in the tents. He's not the man, you know. He's right the opposite. A quiet man. He liked calm. You know, it's very interesting, because then when you think about what he ends up being forced into when he leaves, he no longer is going to be able to sit around the house. He's going to be out working sheep, and when he has to leave and leave the country, he's going to end up doing right the opposite. And then we get this idea in this text of verse 24 through 28 that there's favoritism going on. We see that Isaac loved Esau. And why? He liked his food. That's, you know, he liked his food. Rebekah loved Jacob. Doesn't say why. But it's interesting that Isaac, it's because of his skill and craft of being able to go out, hunt, and bring home and cook. But Rebekah loved Jacob. That's all we have. So we're being told there's some favoritism going on. And we know that favoritism, especially among children, can be very disastrous. And that's going to set a lot of this up too as well, is the parents playing favoritism. And one of the things that I thought about as well is that we need to remember that when Rebekah was struggling with trying to understand what's going on with these twins, I don't think she left Isaac out, because I know that, like my wife, Suzanne, whenever she was having complications and problems or she'd have concerns, we would talk about it. She would say, you know, I have a bad ache, or I'm having migraine, or something going on. So what I'm trying to say is Isaac was not oblivious to this conversation about there's something going on with these two. I've got two. And then the answer that God gave, I'm positive she shared this with Isaac and said, hey, the Lord told me that there's two nations inside me, two peoples, and that the older one is going to serve the younger. But what we find right away is right after their birth, after this knowledge, we see this favoritism. Now, again, we don't know why Rebekah necessarily favored one. We do just know Isaac. And I don't know that anything to do with this promise that God has said who was going to serve who in relationship to that. And then in this, and that's what's interesting, is how that the writer here, Moses in Genesis, is writing this story, is bringing us in and catching us up on the delivery, the bringing up these young boys, the idea of immediately, you know, we jump to an age to where he's out hunting. He's able to go out and hunt Esau. And then he comes back, and then we have this encounter in verses 29 through 34 when Jacob's home cooking. And again, I'm not going to read it. It's up there if you want to go ahead and read that over. But for just the class purposes, that once we see one time Jacob sitting there, he's cooking, and then Esau comes in, he's been out hunting. He's exhausted, he's probably dehydrated. And he immediately goes and says, look, I'm starving, man. Let me eat some of that red stew. And this is also red stew, part of the name Esau, red, Edom, because he sold his birthright. And so Jacob says, okay, some of your birthright now. And this is where the desires of the flesh overpower Esau versus the spiritual blessings and the blessings of the family. He says, well, I'm about to die, so, birthright's really no good to me. And that's true. I mean, if you're on your deathbed, all the money in the bank doesn't mean anything to you. It's pretty worthless. So it's interesting that immediately we see a disposition of both characters of these young men, I should say by now. One, ready to take advantage of the situation, Jacob. Esau, what he really valued. What was really valuable to Esau was more about the body, the physical world around him. And that's what he says. So Jacob makes him commit. He tells him, swear to me. Swear to me now. So he sold him. He swore to him, and he sold his birthright for just stew. So what's the birthright? The birthright is the inheritance, the larger portion of inheritance, along with the role in the family. That's huge to give that up. And I had brought this up, and we talked some about it, the idea of, is this a legal transaction, honestly, in the family? I know that my boys would do a lot of little wheeling and dealing, and sometimes I, as a parent, would have to inject and go, no, you're not doing that. You're not going to swap, and trade, this for that. That's not right. It's not fair. The other brother didn't understand the trade that was necessarily going on, but me as a father, I could have stopped it. So, but I think the point was, period. One, he's going to get the birthright. That's something God has already told his mom, and I bet you she's also shared that with Jacob because she favors him. But now he's taking it upon himself to make sure he gets it. And I think this is where it's interesting about faith. Again, I really am confident. We're not told in the scripture that that Rebekah, his mother, told him all that happened and that, God said, you're going to be the one in charge. You're the one that's going to get the blessing. You're going to, rule over your brother. But I think she did. And so, but here now Jacob, instead of trusting what God had told his mom, he's now doing what? He's almost doing like his grandfather did and saying, well, okay, I'm going to buy it outright. There'll be no question. So Jacob is still very spiritually immature in the fact that he's trying to negotiate this and help out kind of what his mom said he's supposed to do, and he's supposed to rule over his brother. And the way he rules over his brother, get the birthright. But God was going to take care of it. It was going to happen. So that's where I see an immaturity spiritually on Jacob's behalf. And of course, it exposes the type of person that Esau is. And then it doesn't stop there. Then later on, we next read in verses 25 in chapter 25, verses 24 through 28, him stealing the blessing. And this is, in that text we see where Isaac, if we go ahead and you want to just jump to 25 and go to verses 24, we'll pick up there. I got the wrong one there. Sorry about that. Isaac is already old. He's gotten to the point that he's blind. Now, just in chapter 27, I had the wrong verse up there on that slide if you're looking at that. In chapter 26, 34, at the end there, it says Esau was 40 years old. We automatically have something else about Esau, is that he took Judith, the wife of Beeri, the Hittite to be his wife, and Basmath, the daughter of Elon, the Hittite. So now he's already married 2 women that are Hittites that he should not be marrying at all. And look what 35 says. They made life bitter for Isaac and Rebekah. Thinking of himself, sells out his birthright, then turns around and doesn't care about the idea. And I'm sure that Abraham, and it's been passed down, that they're not to intermarry. But again, another character trait of Esau. So picking up at 27 here in this context, 27 verse 1, we see where Isaac is old, and then he calls Esau in. And he tells Esau, go out and hunt and get me some food. I want to enjoy, one last time. I want to enjoy that food and before I die. And then I'm going to give you the blessing. So now we have 2 concepts here. We've got the inheritance and we've got a blessing. So let's keep them separate, because the inheritance was the idea of the physical value of the inheritance of the family, the clan, the money, the leadership, all that. But now the blessing is the blessing that comes from Abraham. The one that God gave Abraham, that Abraham gave to Isaac. And now Isaac is going to be given it to Esau. And I do believe Isaac is aware that God told Rebekah that it's not the way it's supposed to be. But showing favoritism, he's going to show that favoritism by blessing him. And he wants to get this done. Now, Rebekah overhears this, doesn't she? Yeah, she hears what's going on. And so she puts into motion her own plan, which is almost like mother, a son like mother. Because Esau, Jacob is a deceiver, but isn't Rebekah being a little deceptive? Because she overhears this conversation. And whenever he takes off and goes into it, she goes and speaks to Jacob and says, hey, this is what's going down. Your father sent out your brother. He's going to go out and hunt, come back, prepare and cook a meal, and then he's going to feed your father, and your father's going to bless him. And he's going to get that blessing. Now, Rebekah also knows that it should be Jacob. So I think, again, if we look at her faith, God said that he would be the one that would receive this blessing. But here we have Rebekah now as well, showing really kind of a lack of faith and injecting into making this deception work in order to trick Isaac to bless. So see the favoritism, and what it's brought it to a head to is what's happening is all about this favoritism and a lack of faith, honestly, that God is going to accomplish what he has said he would do. And so anyway, they go on, and he comes back, and then so before Esau can arrive, he gets prepared. Jacob is concerned that Esau, because he's so distinctly different physically, that his father is going to know, and if he finds out about this deception, that Isaac is going to turn and put a curse on him. And so mom says, that's okay. So they disguise him by putting some hair on his arms, and makes him, appear to be like his brother. Mom says, you go out, get the animals, brings them in, and she prepares it so that he can go. So he takes it in there. She even gets the clothes of Esau, dresses him up so he has a scent as well, and then goes in there, and he basically is an impostor. But it's interesting, Isaac he may not be able to see, but there's, I don't know how blind he might have been, but he has some sense that there's something not quite right. And maybe it's the voice saying, I'm your firstborn. He's having to tell him who he is. So it's kind of interesting. He has to sell him on that. No, it's me, Dad. I'm Esau. I'm the oldest one. I'm the one. But then Isaac asks him, goes, wait a minute, how'd you get back so quick? So he's not completely old and demented to where he's lost track of time. He knows that if you're going to go out and hunt, and then you're going to have to clean the animal, and then prepare it, cook it, and then come in, that was just a little too quick. So there's a little flaw in the plan that Rebecca and them did, but they don't have time. They don't have time to waste. They have to take care of it. So he says, no, and he lies to him. He says, God granted me success. So he says, well, come here, so that I can fill you. So it's like he wasn't quite satisfied with that. Then he says, okay, well, come a little closer. Let me see. And so he does. He comes forward. But he still, even after he felt, he goes, the voice is Jacob's voice, but your hands are Esau's. So Isaac is a little bit onto this, but he does not recognize him. He's thrown off because of the physical hands, so maybe he's not trusting his hearing. But he says, well, no, the hands are right. That's correct. And he asked him again. He said, are you really my son? In verse 24, he says, I am. Yes, I am. So he says, well, bring me the food. So he brings it. He said, bring me the game, let me eat, and then I'm going to bless you. So he does. He eats and drinks, and then Isaac says, come near and kiss me. And he comes near him, and he gives him the blessing. And the blessing is pretty beautiful, and I want to read that one. So he came near and kissed him, and Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him and said, see, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Curse anyone who curses you. Blessed be everyone who blesses you. So in this, it's not as distinctive as the blessing that we see when God articulated it directly to Abraham or to Isaac, but we see that in this, it is exactly the same. We see the blessing and prosperity that he has promised in talking about the fatness of the earth, plenty of grain and wine, and then the people serving him, having these peoples that are going to come out, the power, and nations are going to also be in submission. So there's a part of this that is looking at through his descendants, that these other nations would be bowing down to him. And then also, there it is right there, be Lord over your brothers. And even your mother's sons, anybody who comes past. And if anybody tries to curse you, they're the ones that are going to be cursed. Anyone blesses you, they'll bless. Well, as soon as he had finished, guess who comes up? As soon as he finished blessing, Jacob had barely gotten out of the tent, it says, in time, because there would have been one fight. We see Esau comes in. He's already prepared the food, brings it in. He says, let my father arise and eat of my son's game, your son's game, that you may bless me. It's interesting because, again, I don't know if it's necessarily important, but it's, that you may bless me. That's his goal. He wants that blessing. And then Isaac's confused. He's like, who are you? I don't know who you are. And he said, I'm your son. I'm your firstborn. You notice he put it in there. He didn't say Esau. I'm your firstborn. I'm the important one, in a sense. And then Isaac, it physically disturbs him. I mean, he becomes overwhelmed, and you see that he knows now that he's been tricked, and he says, he says, then who was it that hunted the game and brought it to me, and I ate it all before you came? And I have blessed him. Yes, he shall be blessed. So Esau's response, as soon as he hears the words of his father, he cried out with exceedingly great and bitter cry. And he said to his father, bless me, even me also, O my father. But he said, your brother came deceitfully, and he has taken away your blessing. Esau said, is he not rightly named Jacob? And for he has cheated me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing. Then he said, have you not reserved any blessing for me? Something? And so he does. Isaac, I don't know if you call it a blessing, but he bestows upon him, a blessing. He says, and Isaac answered him, and he said, behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be, and away from the dew of the heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck. It's right the opposite from what Jacob received. And there's nothing that he's going to be able to do about it. It's already a done deal. He can't undo this. And so not only are you going to not have any prosperity, because that's what the fatness of the land and the dew of the heaven is, but then it's going to be violence. You're going to have a life of violence. And that's the way you're going to die. You're going to live by that, and you're going to end up serving your brother. But you're going to rebel. You're going to rebel against him, and you're going to resist and break away from him. Now, when we look at the Edom, now this map is a map of during the time of the divided kingdom. So if you look at the very bottom of the map there, in the yellow is the kingdom of Edom. And then just up to the above and to your left is, I don't know that you can necessarily read it, it says there, that is the kingdom of Judah. And then the 10 northern tribes in the lighter blue there is the kingdom of Israel. So that whole area there really is Israel. But down south there, it's an entirely mountainous area. So there's no real farmland. It's a real rugged area. Historically, later on, we're going to see whenever the children of Israel are coming out of Egypt and they're traveling through there, the Edomites refuse to let them go through. They attack the kingdom of Israel when they were united under Saul, and they're defeated. 40 years later, we see that once again, when David is ruling as king, that the same happens. David later on in 2 Samuel 8, 13 and 14, he ends up fighting against them, and he defeats the Edomites. And also we see under Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles 20, verse 22, about the Edomites trying again to invade, and they fail. They can't. One of the worst historical things that they do is that when Nebuchadnezzar comes in and is attacking the tribe of Judah and destroys the temple, that the Edomites join in and help him. And they don't just give logistical support to Nebuchadnezzar. They literally pursue them. In Isaiah 34, 5 through 8, and then in Jeremiah 49, talks about the cruelty in which whenever Nebuchadnezzar had come in and defeated and the people were fleeing, that the Edomites went after him and with a lot of cruelty treated the children of the tribe of Judah there. So that's something that's going to cause a lot of problems they're going to have. So coming back to our text in chapter 27, we see in 41, now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are approaching, then I'll kill my brother. So the hatred that is built up to a point where he is just waiting, honoring his father's death, wait for him to die, and then he's going to take Jacob out. So it's not safe for him there, but there's also another purpose that he needs to get away because of what we had read earlier about what was Esau doing. He was marrying foreign Hittite wives. Remember, Isaac, Rebekah is from back in the homeland. So that's what God had directed Abraham, was to make sure that you have your son marry somebody from your family back in the homeland. So this is exactly what's happening. So in verses 42, but the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah. So she went and she called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, "Behold, your brother Esau comforts himself about you by planning to kill you." That's an interesting phrase, isn't it? He comforts himself knowing that he's going to kill you. So this is now where he's going to have to leave. He can't stick around. The violence that's just building up and the hatred that he has, that Esau has against him. So he says, "I want you to get up. I want you to leave." So therefore, now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise and flee to Laban, my brother, in Haran, and stay with him a while until your brother's fury turns away. So she is very disturbed also at the fact of the possibility that in verse 46 it says, "Then Rebekah said to Isaac, I loathe my life because of the Hittite women. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women like these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me?" So Laban, her brother, remember him from back when Abraham's servant went back and was looking for a wife and ends up with Rebekah. Well, Laban was one that was in that story, that was at the house, and the whole family we saw was a family that was worshiping God, was not worshiping pagans. He seemed to be a very spiritual man. So this is where they want him to arise and to go back to Padram Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's fathers, and take a wife from there, one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. Let's go ahead and read 1 through 4 and 28. Then Isaac called Jacob, blessed him, and directed him, "You must not take a wife from the Canaanite women. Arise and go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take as your wife from one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. May he give the blessings of Abraham to you and to your offspring with you, that you may take possession of the land of your sojourners that God gave to Abraham." So at this point, we see Isaac I think he's come to the understanding that this is really the fulfillment of what Rebekah had been told by God, that Jacob was going to be the chosen one. And understanding that Esau, if he sticks around there's a couple of problems with Jacob staying. One, if he stays, it's possible he's going to go marry a Hittite. The other thing is the possibility of Esau killing him. This blessing that he gives him before he makes his journey is again almost the same way that God would give the blessings and remind, whether he would remind Abraham of this blessing, and then with Isaac as well. Here now Isaac is the one giving the blessing. Now that's also kind of an interesting aspect that we see, where God directly was speaking to Abraham, gave him these promises and told him about the blessings that we're going to receive. And throughout his life, God is speaking to Abraham, telling him these. Then when Isaac is born, then you see where it's Abraham, as he passes the blessing, telling him that. But then God comes, and God also tells Isaac that he's going to be receiving the same blessings that Abraham had. Now with Jacob, it's going to be a little different. Here we've seen one by deception. he gets that same blessing that God had given Abraham and God had given to his father Isaac. We see that blessing being given to him through deception. Then we see him telling him again right when he's fixing to start the journey. And as we're going to go ahead and wrap this section of the class up, because I want to kind of segment away the portion where he starts his journey and the arrival back at Padan Aram when he gets there. So here in verse 6, he says, now Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Padan Aram and to take a wife from there, and that he had blessed him, and he directed him, you must not take a wife from the Canaanite women, and that Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother, and he'd gone to Padan Aram. So when Esau saw that the Canaanite women did not please Isaac his father, Esau went to Ishmael. Who's Ishmael? Remember him? His uncle, Isaac's brother, and took as his wife besides the wives he had. So you see the character again. It's like now he knows how disturbing this is to his family, his mother and his father, and the way the Hittite women have been aggravating both Isaac and Rebekah. And at that time, Esau was still favored with Isaac. I think, Isaac was putting up with the wives, but then when he learns that his father has given him another blessing to Jacob, sent him off to go get a proper wife, and that he obeyed him, this causes such resentment in him towards his father now that he's being spiteful even towards his father and the way that he responds. That he is now going to go and take a Hittite, well, not a Hittite, but an Ishmaelite wife. I don't see any comments or anything on social mix. I'm not sure. Maybe there's nobody out there, but we're going to go ahead and we'll wrap up for tonight. I hope that you have a blessed evening and join us this Sunday morning at 9:45 for Bible study, and then at 10:45 for worship. And again next Wednesday, we're going to continue the second part of Jacob and look more at that at 6 p.m. next Wednesday. All right. Well, God bless. We'll see you soon.